Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. This event is part of the use case product and design of Miro user groups. Please be aware that we are recording this session and that you will be able to access the recording afterwards at events.miro.com. Our speaker today is Josua Muheim, who is an accessibility engineer at Nothing AG here in Switzerland. He will be talking about accessibility in digital products, and he will provide us with an example on how accessibility is incorporated in Miro's design. So Joshua, thank you very much for being with us today, and we look forward to your presentation.
Yes, thank you, Johanny, for those introduction words. Yes, accessibility in digital products, or let's take a deeper look at Miro's accessibility. It will be quite interesting. We will do some live testing today, so you will hopefully learn a little bit on how does accessibility testing look like. So let's just start and take a look at today's agenda. After a short introduction of my person and my employer, Nothing AG, we will have a general overview on accessibility, on the topic itself, and then we will have a hands-on accessibility check on Miro itself. And we will draw some conclusions from there. So let's start with that. Who am I actually? Who is talking to you here? This accessibility expert. My name is Josua Muheim. I've been working as a web developer for 15 years already. And I always say that technology should always be used to unlock human potential. And for this to make possible, it's important to include as many individuals as possible. During those 15 years, I've been working as an accessibility expert for roughly 8 years now. It's soonish, it's 9 years. And I've been a former employee of the Access for All Foundation in Switzerland, which itself has half of their employees do have a physical disability. So I kind of learned from the best, I can say, from people who are really, really deeply involved in this topic. I'm also the initiator and main contributor to the Accessibility Developer Guide, which you can look up online. Since the start of this year, I'm working for Nothing AG. It's a lively peer-to-peer organized web company. So we're kind of making the transition from being a web agency to being a venture lab with their own products. And we are located in Bern, Switzerland. So just go to our website, nothing.ch, if you are interested to learn more about us. We're a bunch of approximately 20 people from all different aspects of web design, like UX, SEO, implementation of front ends and back ends, and now especially accessibility has joined the team through my person. And our goal is to strengthen our reputation of being a Swiss tech leader in accessibility and inclusion. So here is our skill sheet, but I don't want to go too deep into that. I will show it later again. Let me just make the statement that we want to empower you and your company, your team. We want to transfer our skills to your team, because that's the most sustainable way of improving the general accessibility landscape. But now, some basic theory, please. What actually is accessibility? And I'm going to switch to my other presentation here. All right. Let's go back some years, maybe 20 or even more years ago. I like to call it the dark ages of accessibility. In the year 1808, actually the first typewriter was invented by a man with the name Pellegrino Turri. He also invented the ink paper. So it was a very gifted person, probably. And this is the interesting thing. He invented this machine for his blind friend, the Countess Carolina Fantoni da Fivizzano. because she wanted to be able to do long distance communication with friends. And for this, she needed some ways of writing, right? The problem with this machine was that actually, okay, she was able now to write letters, but she could still not receive any letters. And even her own letters, she was not able to proofread them because, yeah, it just produced like a typically written letter like we know it from today. What's interesting here is that this special case of a blind person approaching her friend to invent something for her, this made Pellegrino Turri, it made him think outside the box. It was kind of a requirement that he would not have encountered otherwise. And it made him create kind of the fundamental basis of the keyboard that we still use today on every laptop and on every smartphone. So it's kind of, it went into our everyday life, such a strange thing, let's say, call it like that, 200 years ago, is an everyday thing today. Roughly 20 years later, Louis Braille created the Braille tactile writing system. So this is a writing system, some of you may be aware of it, that you can read with your fingertips with those little bulbs on the paper. So Louis Braille invented it at the age of 15, pretty gifted person too. The thing here was, okay, now he could read things written in Braille, but he was not able to write anything in Braille. You need a special machine or equipment for that. Many years later, the first Braille typewriters were invented. But yeah, this is many years later. So the situation was kind of the other way around. Now he could read things using the Braille typewriter. Blind people can even write things now, but most people who are not blind are not able to consume this Braille writing. So they are still not able to communicate with the vast majority of people. Let's skip forward like 180 years. In the year 2000, there have been like 3 typical job opportunities for blind people. So think just a moment, what do you think would blind people be able to accomplish in our world, which is very heavily focused on our eyes, our possibility to use our eyes? Just take a moment and think about that. Well, first of all, it's weaving baskets. Beautiful job, I guess, but I think you cannot make much money out of it in today's, in the world today. The second one is piano tuner. Also a beautiful job, but as most pianos today are electronic ones, yeah, it's not a very luxury income, I guess. The third one, which still holds true today, is massager. I believe that people who are massaging other people who cannot see, I'm confident that they are really good massager, because you can imagine if you're lacking some sensory perception, you will train, you will educate your other sensory perceptions. And I believe, I can imagine that blind people are great massagers for sure. So from these dark times, let's go to modern times, because everything's better now. Or is it? So in the early 2010 years, we had early digital accessibility. So before, digital machines have not been accessible at all. And during those maybe 10 or 15 years, digital accessibility made a huge step. It kind of was born. And it resulted in stable working screen readers and operating systems. So screen readers are those devices that blind people use to read aloud the screen to them. Because they cannot see the screen, they use the software to read aloud all the items on the screen. It's very interesting if you see people using their smartphone on their ears. You will maybe you will notice one day when you see a blind person using a smartphone. Also, we can now scan papers and use optical character recognition to transform it into text, and again use a screen reader to read aloud this text to you. So this is the very first moment in history that a blind person is able to consume a printed out letter to them or a newspaper. Also, navigating and using the web is possible now. And the very first time in history, blind people are completely able now to read and write in a written system, like using the emails. So they are completely able now to do long distance communication with everybody who is able to use emails. So this is a huge leap for the whole blind society. You might remember 10 years ago, there have not been so many services available. For example, e-banking. It was like in its baby shoes back then. But the ones that were available, they were pretty simple. They were just basic HTML websites. I call them like traditional ones. And as such, because HTML by itself is 100% accessible, all those services were accessible too. So this was a pretty great time for people with disability, especially for blind people. The bad side of the coin is that this sophisticated software and hardware was very expensive. This Braille device that you can see here on the right side, back in the days, it used to cost around 5,000 to 10,000 euros. So it was really very expensive, and a lot of people were not able to afford such an expensive piece of technical piece. How does it look today, 10 or 12 years later? Today we have a lot of opportunities, and I want you to take just a moment to think about the following question. How important is to you the internet and your smartphone? So just think about that. Ask yourself, what was the first moment today that you took your smartphone? What kinds of informations were you looking up? Would you have had other ways of getting those informations or services if your smartphone would be not available to you? So I think we all agree that the internet and the smartphone today is kind of one of the most basic things that we have in our everyday life. So from the time when I wake up and I get up and I take a look at the weather information, I take a look at public transportation services. I'm not even working so far with the device. I'm just using it for my convenience, but it is so important, all those activities. And now working with all those devices, all our work, or most of our work, is so heavily based on us being able to use a smartphone, the internet, computers, modern information technology in general. So the beautiful thing is that our smartphones, today they have screen readers integrated, so you don't have to buy them anymore. They are deeply integrated into the operating system. For example, an Apple iOS device has VoiceOver integrated, or the screen reader talkback in Android devices. Those screen readers are free, as I said, and they are pretty easy to use compared to the pretty complex kind of monster softwares that you have on desktop computers. And you can use them to control the virtual world and the physical world through the Internet of Things. We will see an occasion of that in a later video. So in general, we can say we have endless possibilities, but although we have a lot of opportunities, we also have a lot of obstacles. One of the general problems today is that modern apps and websites are what I call fancy. So they are very much visually oriented, and as such, they rely often on pretty complex user interface patterns. So they are often hard to use, even for people who have no special not a certain disability, but are just not used to use computers, like elder people, for example. So often modern web apps and websites are hard to be used by not the standard target group, like young people, digital natives, or whatever you want to call them. And during this implementation process, the implementation process of creating such visually oriented complex interfaces, during this process, a lot of basic requirements are prone to be simply forgotten. For example, a lot of websites today, they do not use HTML anymore the way that it is intended to be used. So there is a standard how to use HTML for website, how to create semantical websites, and many of today's fancy websites, they are just throwing kind of random HTML elements into the website. Then they add a visual layer on top of them, which makes them look great. But in the background, the kind of the basis, the data in the background is often very, very bad. And screen reader users, blind users, they rely on the basis in the background. They cannot consume visual information. They don't know anything about CSS, actually. So they rely on good HTML in the background. What also often is forgotten is that a website or a web app should be usable by keyboard only. Just think of a person who might have problems using a mouse. Maybe this person does not have a hand or an arm, or has a problem using the mouse because they have a tremor or something like that, Parkinson's disease, for example. So this is also basic HTML. Each and every HTML website, if done properly, is totally keyboard only capable. But again, instead of using standard controls from HTML, many fancy websites are trying to implement custom JavaScript controls. And during this process, a lot of standard functionality often just is forgotten because the developers implementing those elements, they just don't think about that. They might never have heard about accessibility at all, actually. And one last thing, which often is a problem, images that don't have text alternatives. So it's not only about search engine optimization to provide a good text alternative to an image. It's mainly it is a help for screen reader users, for blind people who are not able to perceive rasterized images. So for a lot of those people, they have great tools. We have all the technical basics available. Everything is set up to be working, but it just does not work because it's not implemented properly. So let's have a very quick look at the different forms of disability. So we have kind of 4 areas. We have visual disabilities up to blindness. We have hearing impaired people up to deaf people. We have motor impaired people. As I said, for example, a person who is not able to move her arm. And we have a huge part, which is the cognitive and neurological deficiencies, for example, epileptic people. And I think this is a very important point, all those 4 categories, when we are getting older, we will quickly fall into such categories. Even if we don't suffer any deficit today, chances or the risk kind of is very high that one day we will suffer from a form of disability, because we all are getting older. All elder people are disabled in some way, or most of them. And even if it's just like the cognitive capacity, they are not able anymore to consume and consume all those complex information and interaction patterns. Let's have a deeper look at some problems with vision. There are people who cannot perceive any colors. So they might, for example, not be able to differentiate between a red and a green icon. And already color could convey some information, like in stock or out of stock. A very important one, color contrasts. It's kind of meaningless to have a light gray text on a white background, but this is something I encounter quite a lot. And it's not only a problem for people who have problems perceiving contrasts, like elder people. It's also for every person using this website or web app under certain conditions, like direct sunlight on a mobile phone. Another thing is that when we use the keyboard only, most of you will be aware of that, you can then use the tab key to move the focus from one interactive element to the next. So this focus needs to be visible, but often websites just reset the focus visibility completely, and then you're totally confused because you don't know where actually you are currently, on which interactive element your keyboard focus is on. And that's just not necessary. It's just bad design. Some problems with hearing is, for example, if you have a video, when people are speaking and you are not able to hear them, you need subtitles. Or if you are producing, for example, a podcast, just an audio file, a deaf person will not be able to consume it. So you will need a text transcript of the audio. And to wrap things up, let's look at some problems with movement. As I said, many people cannot use a mouse or any other pointing device like a touch screen. They rely on a keyboard only because of certain physical conditions that they have. There are people, for example, who are paraplegic and might not be able to move any part of their body except their tongue. And there are certain devices like a tongue mouse, where people can control this mouse only with their tongue. So this is very slow, very kind of cumbersome, but it's the only way for those people to communicate with the outside world. So it's very, very precious to them. So a typical problem that I already mentioned is that the elements are not focusable, or as I said, the keyboard focus is not visible at all. And sometimes we have fancy or more elaborate interaction patterns like drag and drop. And this is also a problem for people who are not able to use a pointing device. How can I drag and drop anything if I can't move it, right? So you need alternative ways of interaction there. It's usually very easy to provide alternative ways of interaction. You just have to think about it and to do it, not forget it. And one last thing is sometimes interactive elements are very, very small, so it's hard to hit them. and especially people, as I said, with for example, Parkinson's, will have a very hard time hitting the right button, maybe even hitting the wrong button. Instead of pressing save, they will press discard, for example, or cancel, which is very frustrating. And what we also have to keep in mind, people with those impairments, for example, the person who would only use a mouse, like the mouse that they are controlling with their tongue, they need a lot of time to do things that we are doing like in a few seconds, right? Imagine entering your name with an on-screen keyboard using a tongue mouse. You can imagine it will take quite some time. So we need enough time for those people. For example, during a checkout process, it's very frustrating if you have entered everything and just before pressing the submit button, there's this notification: I'm sorry, you used longer than 10 minutes. We locked you out for security reasons. But now let's take a look at the possibilities that we have for today and tomorrow, because so much can actually be possible if we provide our users with an experience that is suitable for everybody. And I want to introduce you to a friend of mine, Daniele Gorciulo. He is an accessibility expert himself. He is nearly blind. He has 1 or 2% of eyesight, actually. I met him when working also for the Foundation Access for All, and he's now working for the Fachstelle Studium und Behinderung at the University of Zurich. And I'd like to show you his beautiful song, Take My Hand, where he is showing how digital technology is helping him to live a self-empowered life. So I will play that. I'm actually not really sure whether you can hear the sound. I really hope that you can hear the sound. Otherwise, let's just post the link in the chat so you are able to take a look at it yourself. Let's see, where is the chat link? Chat with everyone. All right, so I posted the link right now. And just take yourself a moment to look at the video while I'm playing it here too. All right. So I'll just wait for another few seconds so everybody can finish their experience. All right, so what was Daniele able to do? For example, he's able to use the public transport because he has the electronic timetable that he can use with his screen reader on his phone. He also has the Braille handles, He also has the Braille handles and the guidelines for the white stick. This has nothing to do with digital accessibility. This is traditional analog accessibility. Then he's able to read his paper mail exactly because he can use a scanner and then OCR and text-to-speech. So the paper is read out to him. He is able to identify objects using a barcode scanner, again with his phone. So this is very useful if you want to cook something and you want to be sure that the can you're having in your hand is not your dog food, but your beans, for example. And the last thing that you have seen, he's able to completely operate a coffee machine using a smartphone app that he can then connect through Bluetooth again to his smartphone. And again, using his screen reader, he can operate the coffee machine, which would otherwise be completely inaccessible to him. So, as I said, I always say that technology is here to unlock our human potential. Creating accessible product means equality of regardless of physical differences of individuals. And in my opinion, it's not about creating a social welfare state, actually not. It's about empowering people. It's about including them and to unlock their human potential for the full society. Because maybe you know Stephen Hawking, a very, very intelligent physicist, mathematician, and he's a great example for what I claimed before. Disabled people, they are used to think outside the box because their whole life they were required to think outside the box. And this potential, this creativity that they have, if we can use this for for the whole humanity, we are very lucky, I would say, if we can do that. Because again, remember the typewriter. It was invented 200 years ago for a blind person. And just pose yourself the question, would we have smartphones today in the same way that they are if this did not happen 200 years ago? And I want to wrap up this first part, this introduction to accessibility, with a quote from Carli Fiorina, which is, "Human potential is the only limitless resource we have on this earth." And I think she's really, really right. All right. So after this theoretical part, let's become more physical, more actionable, more concrete, more tangible. So let's get our hands dirty and live test Miro on accessibility. And I have a quick and dirty battle plan for this. It's kind of the very short version of what I do kind of in a daily basis when working as an accessibility expert, when I'm testing a product of a client. So one of those things which I always do in the very beginning is testing color and contrasts. And then another thing to do is testing keyboard-only operability, because we have seen how important it is that the product can be used with the keyboard only. What I would usually also do is testing using a screen reader to see whether a blind person can handle the content. We don't have time today to delve too deep into this topic, but yeah, just so you know, this is also a very important step. And actually, as we will see today, it's hard to make a very visually oriented software like Miro accessible for blind people, obviously, right? But still, there are possibilities to do that. And Miro is already doing a lot on trying to accomplish good accessibility for blind people. We will take a look at that in a moment. So let's just go to the live testing part. I have here a Miro board open, accessibility in digital products. Thank you again, Johanny, for preparing this for me. And let's just take a look at the colored contrast first. And usually I want to have a look at all the content and the interactive elements. So as you can see, yeah, it looks on the first side, it looks quite contrasty what we have here. I have this nice little tool, the color contrast analyzer, which allows me to pick a foreground and a background element, and then it would tell me whether contrast is good, and we see here nearly 20:1, which is great contrast. So this is very good. But here, for example, this little icon here, this star icon that I could use to star this board, let's have a look at its contrast. It has a contrast ratio of 1.6:1, which is far away from acceptable. So it needs to have a contrast ratio of at least 3:1 for bigger elements, or 4.5:1 for smaller elements. We have quite a few other elements which also have bad color contrasts. For example, the search here. Sorry, I was just distracted. Oops, I need to reload here because I had something running in the background which I don't want to run. So again, perfect. Now it's what I want to show. We have this filter element here, which is also hardly visible to anybody who does not know that there is this element. Then a very bad one is the one here on the bottom left, right? So it gives us more tools to work with, but to a lot of people, especially maybe elderly people, they will never know about those tools because they will never find them. They will not see that they can click on something down here. Exactly. Yes, and the last one, I mean, I'm really picky here because most of the elements have a really good contrast, but also this magnifier symbol here in the search, it's very hard to perceive. Another topic is the content of Miro. So if we go and take a look at those standard templates that we are using, we can see, okay, the text looks pretty good. Let's have a look at this blue here. Again, I doubt that it has good contrast, but sometimes it's hard to see. It's 2.8:1, which is a little bit too low. So it should be a little bit more contrasty. But here the black text is good, here again. But now you see those borders, those thin lines, or maybe even this background color here, this light gray. I mean, I'm picky now, but actually they convey some meaning. They are grouping elements together. They are creating context. They are creating relationships between different objects. So actually, I would vote for the importance of seeing those elements. And actually, again, I could run my tool again, but I can guarantee you it's far from being visible to a lot of people. So what I would advise here is to offer kind of a high contrast mode. Maybe another icon up here, press it, and then just kind of the borders, the outlines of elements would be enhanced a little bit. Or some of the basic colors, the standard colors would be increased a little bit to offer more contrast to the background. So let's come to the interactive part. I want to invite you to play around a little bit with this board. And for this, oops, I will share a link with you. Everybody who has the link can edit it. I'm gonna put it into the chat, and I invite you, try to create something, try to select some element and to edit it in some way. Just don't use your mouse. Just try to select, edit, move, change text or whatever, and try not to use your mouse. If you have absolutely no luck without a mouse, use your mouse a little bit, maybe for selecting something. Oops. Maybe for selecting something and then interact with it. For example, moving something. So let's just take a minute or two. I'm sharing this link with you. So please take a minute and play around with Miro. And as you can see, if you see my shared screen, people are already starting to do something. And as they are moving, as their mouse pointers are moving, I suspect them to use their pointing devices. So probably they are not too lucky in using only their keyboard. So you can continue in the background to test yourself, but I will just show you how I will test it. So usually what I do, I would use first of all the tab key and try to move the focus from one interactive element to the next. And when I do that, I see absolutely nothing happening here. So this can have two reasons. The first one is that the visibility of the focus is not there. So there would be a focus, but it's not visible. Or that there is no focusability at all. And what I do usually then is to inspect the code or the elements on the website and inspect whether the interactive elements actually are implemented as interactive elements, right? So as you can see here, the whole toolbar on the left, it's not buttons. Although it looks like buttons, it behaves like buttons using a pointer, it's not implemented as buttons. It's implemented as diff, and diff do not have any semantical meaning, and they are absolutely not meant to be used as interactive elements. So for some reason, the developer here decided to not use basic HTML. And with that, he also consciously or unconsciously decided to drop a lot of standard functionality, like keyboard-only navigation. All right, so what I also like, because I'm kind of a power user, even though I'm able to move a mouse, I love to use keyboard shortcuts. For example, I often use Command-Shift-A to switch to another tab. And as you can see, nothing happens here. If I go to another website and do it here, Command-Shift-A, it will open my list of opened tabs. This is not possible in Miro. Also, it's not possible to use Command-R to refresh the page. It's also not possible to use Command 2 or 3 or 4 to jump to an opened tab. For example, if I want to jump back to my presentation here, I could just use Command 2 or 3, but nothing happens. So this is kind of, bugging to me and to a lot of users who are either power users and wanting to use their keyboard shortcuts, or are disabled users who need to use such keyboard shortcuts. When we look a little bit closer, we can see that actually, okay, we seem to have some shortcuts provided. For example, I can press the S key to open this menu for creating a shape. But again, that's all I can do. I cannot use the arrow or keys or anything to actually select an element. So again, I have to press here. And also, I cannot, in my opinion, there's no way of creating something or selecting an element without using the mouse. So in fact, keyboard-only users here, they can only watch the board. They can browse it, they can perceive it normally, but they are not able to actually use any interactive feature here. There's one little exception. So when I go and browse the apps and I enter something here, no, it's not an exception, I'm sorry. It's another thing that's missing in my opinion. I want to use the up and down keys here to toggle through the elements, but also this does not work. Even pressing ESC, which I'm used to close any kind of dialogue, is not working here. So although some basic interactive patterns are implemented for keyboard only, a lot of kind of standard behavior is not implemented, and a lot of totally standard behavior from the browser is intercepted and forbidden. There might be some reasons for that, which I'm not aware of, but for me as a general user, it's just annoying and frustrating. All right, so I want to invite you to stop playing with the Miro board and to come back to my presentation, because yeah, I'm continuing here. Let's draw some conclusions. How accessible is Miro in the end, or how accessible can a drawing app actually be? So as you have seen, Miro is by far not a typical website, and we need to be fair about that. So it's a pretty complex drawing thing, actually. It tries, or it imitates, a full-blown interactive drawing app. So it rather looks like a graphical canvas than like a traditional website. And as you can imagine, for drawing things, a pointing device is pretty crucial for input. But I want to challenge this question. Is it really crucial to have a pointing device to create, to move, to edit elements on a canvas, on a graphical canvas? But inherently, you would think, because of Miro being an interactive drawing app, the consumption of graphical content is hard, if not impossible, for blind users. This is pretty true. Because the canvas, which we use in the background, the canvas element, it's just rendered pixels. It's not accessible to screen readers at all. It's like a bitmap or a JPEG image. It's not accessible to screen readers. And there are reasons to use a canvas, absolutely. I'm not saying that Miro does anything wrong here, but maybe there are ways to optimize a few things to make it more accessible. As you have seen, the keyboard interaction is limited. And this raises the big question, how accessible can interactive graphical user interfaces actually be? And let me start quickly with the screen readers. First of all, kudos to Miro. They are actually giving an alternative view to screen readers, so screen readers are able to consume the content in some way. It's not perfect at all, but in their accessibility statement, they describe a little bit of what approaches they are using to make it more accessible to people. So as I said, Miro has a dedicated screen reader mode which allows to browse the elements in an additional HTML view. They are not able to change anything, but at least they can kind of browse the contents. Although it's hard for them to make sense of the contents, because a lot of the content relies on the graphical elements and on their arrangement on the two-dimensional screen. In general, I'm very cautious with special modes for certain user groups. Usually they are created with good intention, but they are prone to be forgotten when maintaining afterwards. And so they quickly get out of sync with the real view, and then they are doing more bad than good in the end. Also, Miro offers an accessibility feedback journey. So please, if you go to Miro and you have some problems, please fill it out. They are trying to get information, behaviors of their users, so they can optimize the experience, which is very, thank you a lot for doing that, Miro. So what about visually slightly impaired users? Not blind users, but people who have certain problems with their vision. Again, well done, Miro. The contrasts in general are very good. We have seen a few exceptions. What I would suggest is, as I said, to implement a high contrast mode for the drawing elements. So for example, you could just add outlines to the shapes, which would look like something like that. If I activate the high contrast mode, it would just add some more outlines. Maybe it would even, as I said, change some background and foreground colors, some text colors, to make the contrast more visible. Now we come to the biggest point, in my opinion, the keyboard-only users. And there I need to say there's definitely much more possible for them than is actually possible in Miro. They are quite restricted in their usage, and there's actually no need for that. First of all, I highly advise to undisable the default tab key functionality, at least for the general UI elements, or offer more shortcuts for them and better integration of like the arrow keys, the enter key to switch, to move through those elements, to activate them, etc. A good thing to do is, as I said, use standard HTML, use buttons instead of divs. This will make your life so much easier. And please stop hijacking so much browser default keyboard combinations, like the ones that we've seen to switch between tabs or to open the tabs search dialog. I mean, sometimes you need to override some special keyboard combinations, but as you've seen before, nothing happened when I used those keyboard combinations. So please just not hijack all of them. Hijack those that really give a functionality to the user. Everything else is just like frustrating. So please extend the existing keyboard functionality. As I said, when opening the apps selector, I'd like to use my arrow keys to toggle through the search list. I'd like to use the ESC key to reset the search element or to completely close it. And now, I think this is the most interesting and most elaborate kind of thing that you should add for Miro to make it a fully functionable experience, even for keyboard-only users. It's introducing new modes of interaction. So you should introduce keyboard shortcuts, for example, for creating new elements, for resizing those elements, and very important, for selecting existing elements on the canvas. And I have two ideas on how you could do that in a very easy way. The first of it is a dialog with fuzzy search, kind of similar to the app selection. You could just offer a dialog that you can search for all the elements on the screen and then just use the up and down arrow keys, the enter key, whatever, to just select it. Maybe even press the shift key if you want to add the current element to the selection or remove it from the selection. So you could select many elements at the same time. And the second way of creating, of allowing to select existing elements is creating dynamic shortcuts. And I want to show you what I mean on this next slide. So,
all right, sorry, Josua, for interrupting. It's just to remind you that we have 4 minutes left. So maybe we can wrap up and see if the participants may have some questions.
Perfect. Give me a minute, I'll be finished. So just press a specific key like the Alt key, and then it would just show some numbers on the screen for each element, and then you could press the appropriate number key and you would select it. So that's very, very simple, but very, very effective. And that's what I wanna say here. It ain't need much usually to empower people. You just need to be aware of their needs, and the implementation in the end is pretty easy actually. So I think we are pretty pretty finished now on the right time spot. Thank you everybody for joining my talk, and I'm open now for questions and discussion. And please forgive me the boldness to show this last slide, our kind of skill sheet in the background. But I'm very happy now to receive some questions.
All right. So first of all, thank you very much, Josua, for this insightful presentation. It was very, very interesting, and we very much appreciate it. I'm sure that we will have some opportunity to pass on your message to Miro, and also put you in contact with them. Maybe there is some way of communication around this.
Cool. Thank you.
Sure. So for the participants, please feel free to unmute yourself and pose your question if you have any.
Can be any question about accessibility, actually. This is your chance to raise this question that you always had in your mind.
Yeah, actually, I have a question while we are warming up the discussion session. So we know that there are laws around accessibility, and there are different levels of how strictly this is followed. So can you tell us a little bit how important it is from a legal point of view for an organization to apply accessibility in their designs?
Sure. So there's a huge variation of laws across different countries. So what I know from the US, from the United States, it's very important there to create accessible user interfaces. They have integrated this requirement very deeply in their laws. In Germany, in Switzerland, in Austria, which is usually my kind of focus, it's a little bit different. The laws are quickly becoming stronger, but so far, at least in Switzerland, the private sector is not yet required to give an accessible user experience. But this might change very soon, because also Switzerland has ratified the UNO Behindertenrechtskonvention, so the convention from the UNO. And the UNO, they also require the private sector to provide accessible interfaces. It's just a matter of time. It might be a few years, it might be a little bit longer, it might be even tomorrow. I don't really know. So they are preparing this very actively right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good. So apparently we don't have more questions in the session. We have actually reached the hour here. Once again, everybody, thank you very much for joining, especially Josua. This was a very insightful presentation, very interesting to look at Miro from different angles and a different viewpoint, and especially in terms of accessibility, to bring this message forward for inclusive design. And I definitely will put you in contact with some people at Miro that probably can make some impact within the organization, and probably this could start a discussion around this.
Beautiful.
For the rest of the participants, once again, thank you very much for joining us today. Feel free to look at events.miro.com for more events, insightful discussions around design, product design, and different other topics. And I look forward to seeing you again in the future. Take care.
Thank you very much, Johanny, for hosting this, and I hope we will talk later again. Perfect.
Sure. It was a
pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.